November 9, 1914, Vienna trembled under the weight of an empire crumbling at its edges. In a cramped apartment on the city's unfashionable outskirts, a girl named Hedwig Eva Maria Kiesler entered the world screaming not the delicate cry expected of proper Viennese daughters, but a furious, demanding wail that seemed to protest the limitations already being written into her future. Her father, Emil Kiesler, a director at the Bank of Vienna, held his newborn daughter up to the gaslight and smiled. He had no way of knowing that this child would one day be told her only value lay in her face, even as her mind conceived inventions that would transform human communication itself. The Kiesler household defied convention in ways both subtle and profound. While Vienna's elite raised daughters to master embroidery and piano, Emil spent evenings walking young Hedwig through the mechanical workings of printing presses, streetcars, and music boxes. According to biographical accounts documented in Richard Rhodes' Hetty's Folly, Emil would disassemble household objects and challenge his daughter to understand their inner logic, fostering in her an intuitive grasp of mechanical systems that few university-trained engineers possessed. Her mother, Gertrude, a pianist from Budapest, contributed a different gift, an understanding that beauty and intelligence were not opposing forces, but complementary ones, despite what society insisted. By 1930, 16-year-old Hedwig had blossomed into a creature that stopped traffic on the Ringstrasse. Dark hair framed features so perfectly proportioned that strangers would pause mid-conversation to stare. But while Vienna's theater director saw only a face, Hedwig's mind churned with questions about radio frequencies and remote-controlled systems. She had begun studying engineering at the Friedrich Wilhelms University in Berlin, one of the few young women in a lecture hall of skeptical men. The professors tolerated her presence with barely concealed amusement, certain this beautiful girl was merely entertaining herself before an inevitable marriage. Then came the invitation that would derail everything. Max Reinhardt, the theatrical impresario whose productions defined European stage drama, offered Hedwig a role in his Berlin production. The stage lights found her, and suddenly the girl who understood the mathematics of synchronized systems became Hetty Kiesler, actress. Her natural talent was undeniable, her beauty transcendent. Film roles followed with dizzying speed. By 1932, she had signed to appear in Ecstasy, a Czech film directed by Gustav Machat. The film would make her simultaneously famous and infamous. Ecstasy featured cinema's first depiction of a woman experiencing orgasmic pleasure, Hetty's face in close-up, swimming in what appeared to be genuine ecstasy. It also included a nude running sequence through the woods. When the film premiered in Prague on January 20, 1933, Europe erupted in scandal. Pope Pius XI denounced it. Adolf Hitler banned it throughout Germany. And Hetty Kiesler became the most recognizable and most objectified woman on the continent. She was 18 years old, and the world had already decided what she was worth: a face, a body, an object of desire. The idea that this scandalous beauty might also possess a revolutionary scientific mind was simply inconceivable. Even Hetty herself couldn't have predicted that within a decade. She would develop a patent that the United States Navy would classify for its military applications technology. That would eventually enable the smartphone revolution, GPS navigation, and wireless communication across the globe. March 10, 1933 marked the day Hedwig Eva Maria Kiesler made what she would later call the greatest mistake of her life. In a ceremony at the Karlskirche in Vienna, she married Friedrich Mandl, a Viennese arms manufacturer 13 years her senior. Mandl was more than wealthy. He was one of Europe's most powerful munitions dealers, supplying weapons to Mussolini's Italy, Austria's authoritarian government, and quietly negotiating with the rising Nazi regime. He possessed the kind of money that could buy anything: palaces, politicians, and, as he believed, a beautiful wife to display like a prized painting. What followed was not a marriage, but an imprisonment disguised in silk and diamonds. Mandl became pathologically possessive, stationing guards outside their Salzburg mansion, monitoring her every movement, attempting to buy up every copy of Ecstasy in existence to erase the film that had made her famous. Hetty was forbidden from continuing her acting career, forbidden from appearing in public without his permission, reduced to ornamental status at the endless dinner parties where Mandel entertained fascist officials and weapons buyers. But Mandel made a catastrophic miscalculation. He assumed that because his wife was beautiful, she must be intellectually negligible. So he allowed her to sit silently through business dinners where military scientists and engineers discussed weapons technology, torpedo guidance systems, and the emerging field of radio-controlled devices. The men spoke freely, never imagining that the silent beauty at the table's end was absorbing every technical detail, her engineer's mind cataloging frequencies, jamming techniques, and the fundamental vulnerability of all radio-controlled weapons. Their signals could be intercepted or blocked. According to accounts preserved in the archives of the IEEE Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers, Hetty learned that radio-controlled torpedoes' cutting-edge technology in the 1930s were almost useless in actual combat. Enemy ships could easily jam the single-frequency radio signals controlling them, rendering the expensive weapons helpless. As she sat through dinner after dinner, her hands folded demurely in her lap, her mind was solving the problem the engineers couldn't crack. What if the signal constantly changed frequencies, hopping from channel to channel in a pattern only the sender and receiver knew? By 1937, Hetty's marriage had become unbearable. Mandel's controlling obsession had intensified as Hitler's power grew and Austria's independence collapsed. She made her decision during a dinner party at their estate, surrounded by Nazi officers discussing their plans for Austria. That night she waited until the house slept, then drugged her maid, dressed in the woman's clothes, and fled with only the jewelry she could carry. She made her way to London by train, constantly looking over her shoulder. Certain Mandel's agents were following. In London, she met Louis B. Mayer, the powerful head of Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer Studios, who was in Europe scouting talent. Mayer saw what everyone saw: an extraordinarily beautiful woman with acting experience and a scandalous film in her past-perfect Hollywood material. He offered her a contract, but insisted she change her name. Hetty Kiesler, the notorious star of Ecstasy, would be reborn as Hetty Lamar, borrowing the surname of silent film star Barbara Lamar. On September 28, 1937, Hetty boarded the SS Normandy bound for New York, leaving behind her first marriage, her European identity, and a continent sliding toward total war. She was 23 years old. Hollywood awaited, ready to worship her beauty while dismissing everything else she had to offer. But she carried with her something the movie moguls would never understand: a mind that had been educated in the weapons technology of the coming war, and an idea that would eventually change the world. September 30th, 1937, Hetty Lamar descended the gangplank of the SS Normandy into the chaos of New York Harbor, flashbulbs exploding like small supernovas around her face. The American press had been primed for her arrival, the most beautiful woman in the world, they called her. The Ecstasy Girl, the scandalous European import who would bring continental sophistication to Hollywood. Not one reporter asked about her thoughts on weapon systems or radio technology. They wanted to know about her beauty routine, her diet, whether she was romantically available. Louis B. Mayer had plans for his new acquisition. Within weeks, Hetty was installed in Hollywood, given acting coaches, publicity handlers, and a carefully constructed image. Her first American film, Algiers, released in 1938, made her an instant star. Opposite Charles Boyer, she played a beautiful woman whose primary function was to be beautiful. Critics raved about her exotic looks while barely mentioning her performance. The pattern was set: Hetty would be worshipped for her appearance and nothing else. But Hollywood's golden goddess spent her evenings in a completely different world. While other starlets attended parties and premieres, Hetty retreated to a room in her Bel Air home she had converted into a laboratory. She installed a drafting table and filled the space with technical manuals, engineering textbooks, and whatever mechanical devices she could acquire and disassemble. Her neighbors included some of Hollywood's most creative minds, but few understood that creativity could manifest in both art and science. The exception was Howard Hughes. The eccentric aviation tycoon and filmmaker recognized in Hetty a kindred spirit, someone whose mind never stopped working on problems. According to documentation in the Howard Hughes Medical Institute archives, Hughes would invite Hetty to his aircraft plants where they discussed aerodynamics and plane design. When she mentioned wanting to help with the war effort, Hughes took her seriously. He set her up with equipment and encouraged her scientific interests, even as the rest of Hollywood saw her only as a decorative object. By 1940, Europe was consumed by war. Hetty watched newsreels of London burning under the Luftwaffe's bombs, of U-boats sinking Allied ships in the Atlantic, of Nazi armies rolling across the continent she had fled. She thought constantly about the dinner table conversations from her marriage to Mandel, about the vulnerability of radio-controlled weapons, about the solution her mind had conceived years earlier. Then came the news that catalyzed everything. On September 17, 1940, a German U-boat torpedoed the SS City of Benares, a British ship evacuating 90 children to Canada. 77 children drowned in the cold Atlantic waters. Hetty was devastated. She knew that Allied ships desperately needed better torpedo technology to fight the U-boats. She knew the current radio-controlled torpedoes could be jammed. And she knew she had a solution. At a dinner party that autumn, Hetty met George Heil, an avant-garde composer known as the bad boy of music for his experimental works. They struck up an unlikely friendship, discussing music and mechanics in equal measure. Heil had experimented with automatically synchronized player pianos in his compositions, coordinating multiple instruments through mechanical systems. During one conversation, Hetty explained her idea for frequency-hopping radio signals, and Heil immediately grasped the concept. What if they could synchronize a transmitter and receiver the way his player pianos synchronized instruments using identical perforated rolls to coordinate frequency changes? They began meeting regularly, working through the mathematics and mechanics of what they called their secret communication system. Hetty's understanding of weapon systems and radio frequencies combined with Heil's knowledge of synchronized mechanical devices. Throughout 1941, between film shoots where directors positioned her like a sculpture and gave her forgettable lines, Hetty was inventing technology that would transform human communication. But when she tried to discuss her work with studio executives or fellow actors, she encountered only bemused condescension. The message was clear: stick to what you're good at, sweetheart. Selling kisses on screen. August 11, 1942, Hetty Lamar and George Heil stood in the United States Patent Office in Washington, D.C., submitting patent number 2,292,387, Secret Communication System. The patent diagram showed an elegant solution to the problem that had stymied military engineers for years of frequency-hopping spread spectrum that would make radio-controlled torpedoes impossible to jam or intercept. The transmitter and receiver would simultaneously change among 88 different frequencies, synchronized like the 88 keys of a piano, using a mechanism identical to the perforated rolls in player pianos. The technology was revolutionary, genuinely ahead of its time. By constantly shifting frequencies in a predetermined pattern, the system would appear as random noise to anyone intercepting the signal. Only the intended receiver, with an identical synchronized system, could decode the message. The military applications were obvious: unjammable radio-controlled torpedoes, secure communications, guidance systems that couldn't be intercepted by enemy forces. It was precisely what the Allied war effort needed as German U-boats terrorized the Atlantic. But the United States Navy rejected it. According to declassified documents from the National Archives, military officials dismissed the patent as impractical, too bulky to fit inside a torpedo, too complex to manufacture during wartime. These were legitimate engineering concerns, but they masked a deeper prejudice. A technology invented by a movie star and an avant-garde composer? Naval officers, trained to respect hierarchies and credentials, couldn't take seriously an invention from such unlikely sources, especially when one of the inventors was a woman known primarily for being beautiful. Hetty was devastated but not surprised. She had spent years watching brilliant ideas dismissed because of who presented them rather than their merit. The Navy suggested she could better serve the war effort by using her celebrity status to sell war bonds instead. It was the same message she had been receiving since arriving in Hollywood: your value is your appearance, not your mind. So, she did what they suggested, touring the country and raising $7 million for the war effort through bond sales $7 million that would purchase weapons and supplies, while her potentially war-winning invention gathered dust. Throughout the war years, Hetty continued making films: White Cargo, The Heavenly Body, The Conspirators. Each role showcased her beauty while wasting her talent. Directors positioned her in flattering light and gave her lines like, "I'm so confused," and "whatever you say, darling." Meanwhile, the invention she and Antheil had created sat classified and unused in military archives. The Navy had put the patent on the shelf, classifying it as restricted military technology, but never developing it, ensuring that neither the military nor anyone else could benefit from it. The war ended in 1945. Hetty's patent, filed in 1942, would expire in 1959. For 17 years, the frequency-hopping spread-spectrum technology existed only on paper, a solution to problems the world didn't yet know it had. Hetty continued acting, continued being celebrated for her beauty, continued being dismissed when she mentioned her interest in invention. She married again, and again 6 marriages in total, each one eventually collapsing under the weight of men who wanted a beautiful ornament rather than a complete person. According to research published by the MIT Press in their comprehensive history of wireless technology, the Navy finally revisited Hetty's patent in 1962 during the Cuban Missile Crisis. By then, the technology could be implemented with transistors rather than player-piano mechanisms. The Navy installed frequency-hopping systems on ships sent to blockade Cuba, successfully using Hetty's invention to ensure secure communications that Soviet forces couldn't intercept. But there was no fanfare, no acknowledgement, no compensation for the inventor. The patent had expired 3 years earlier. Hetty was 48 years old when her invention was finally used, living in quiet semi-retirement, her film career long over. She had no idea the military was implementing her technology. Hollywood had moved on to younger beauties, and the world had forgotten that the glamorous star had ever possessed a scientific mind. The secret communication system was deployed in silence, its inventor uncredited and unaware. January 1st, 1966, marked Hedy Lamarr's 52nd birthday, a milestone she faced in a small apartment in New York, far from Hollywood's spotlight. The film industry that had once worshipped her beauty now had no use for her. Her last significant role had been years earlier, and the offers that still came were insulting small parts trading on nostalgia for her youthful glamour. She had essentially retired from acting, living modestly on savings and occasional royalties, invisible to a culture obsessed with youth. What she didn't know was that her invention was spreading through military and commercial applications like underground roots from a hidden seed. Throughout the 1960s and 70s, engineers at military contractors and electronics companies discovered the expired patent for the secret communication system. The frequency-hopping spread spectrum concept solved multiple emerging problems in wireless communications. As transistors replaced vacuum tubes and digital systems became feasible, Hetty's elegant solution became increasingly practical. The military applications expanded first. The Navy's successful use during the Cuban Missile Crisis proved the concept. By the Vietnam War era, frequency hopping was being incorporated into secure military communications across all branches of service. The technology prevented enemy interception and jamming, exactly as Hetty and Antheil had envisioned in 1941. But because the patent had expired and the technology was originally classified, there was no trail leading back to its inventors. Engineers referenced the concepts as established wireless theory, unaware of their origin. Meanwhile, Hetty aged into invisibility. She became reclusive, rarely leaving her apartment, speaking to journalists only occasionally. In 1974, she was arrested for shoplifting at a Los Angeles department store, a bizarre incident that revealed both the depths of her obscurity and her continued struggles. Here was a woman who had once been called the most beautiful in the world, who had raised $7 million for the war effort, who had invented technology the military was actively using, arrested for stealing at age 60. The incident was quietly resolved, but it underscored how completely she had been forgotten. The technological world, however, was accelerating toward the future Hetty had imagined. In the 1980s, the development of cellular networks faced a critical problem: how to allow multiple users to share limited radio spectrum without interference. Engineers at companies like Qualcomm discovered that frequency hopping spread spectrum and its related technique, direct sequence spread spectrum, could enable multiple simultaneous communications channels. The foundation of modern cellular technology rested on principles Hetty had patented 4 decades earlier. Then came the digital revolution. As personal computers emerged and the Internet developed, the need for wireless data transmission became critical. Engineers developing what would become Wi-Fi faced the same challenges Hetty had solved: how to transmit data wirelessly without interference, with security and reliability. The solution employed spread spectrum technology directly descended from her patent. Similarly, Bluetooth technology for short-range wireless device communication used frequency hopping across 79 channels, a direct application of Hetty's core concept. The Global Positioning System, or GPS, which would transform navigation and eventually enable smartphone mapping, incorporated spread spectrum technology to ensure signals could be received reliably and securely. Every time a phone triangulated its position using satellite signals, it employed principles from a patent filed by a Hollywood actress in 1942. The technological revolution of the late 20th century wireless everything was built on a foundation Hedy Lamarr had laid, while the world insisted she had nothing to offer but her face. And still, she received no recognition, no royalties, no acknowledgement. The patent had expired before the technology became commercially viable, so she had no legal claim to compensation. More fundamentally, the chain of attribution had broken. The engineers building modern wireless systems knew the concepts but not their origin. They had learned spread spectrum principles from textbooks and technical papers that treated the ideas as general knowledge, never mentioning the unlikely inventors who had first conceived them. November 9, 1997. Hedy Lamarr turned 83 years old in her apartment in Castleberry, Florida, living in seclusion, rarely seeing anyone, her days of glamour and invention equally distant memories. Her health was declining, her finances modest, her place in history seemingly reduced to a footnote about Hollywood's golden age. She had no reason to expect that her scientific contribution would ever be acknowledged, let alone celebrated. The world had made its judgment about her value decades earlier. Then that same year, something extraordinary happened. The Electronic Frontier Foundation, a digital rights organization, decided to honor Hetty and George Antheil with a Pioneer Award for their invention of frequency hopping, spread spectrum technology. Finally, 55 years after filing the patent, Hetty would receive public recognition for her scientific contribution. But in a twist that seemed to capture the entire trajectory of her life, Hetty refused to attend the ceremony. She sent a representative instead, unwilling to allow herself to be put on display one more time, unwilling to have cameras focus on her aged face when they had only valued her youth. The Pioneer Award began a cascade of recognition. As the story spread through technology circles and eventually to mainstream media, people were astonished to learn that a Hollywood actress from the 1940s had invented foundational technology behind modern wireless communication. The IEEE professional engineering organizations and technology historians began examining her contribution seriously. Articles appeared explaining how Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, GPS, and cellular networks all employed principles from her patent. According to reporting by the New York Times and other major publications during this period, the revelation sparked widespread fascination. Here was a narrative that challenged every assumption. The beautiful actress was secretly a brilliant inventor. The woman dismissed as mere decoration had created technology that would enable the smartphone age. The star told to stick to selling kisses had conceived innovations that male engineers initially couldn't recognize. It was a story of sexism, of unrecognized genius, of the price paid when society reduces people to one-dimensional stereotypes. In 1998, Hetty and Antheil's estate received the Electronic Frontier Foundation's Pioneer Award. That same year, the Ottawa Wireless Technology Forum gave Hetty a Technology Recognition Award. In 1999, She became the first woman to receive the Invention Convention's Bulby Nass Spirit of Achievement Award, a bronze sculpture representing innovation and creativity. The awards accumulated, each one acknowledging what should have been recognized in 1942. But recognition came too late for Hetty to fully enjoy it. By the late 1990s, she was in her mid-80s, dealing with declining health, largely confined to her Florida apartment. She gave a few interviews by phone, her voice weakened but still sharp. In one interview, she expressed satisfaction that her contribution was finally being acknowledged, but also bitterness about the decades of dismissal. "It's about time," she said simply when told about the various honors. The technology industry began explicitly crediting her. Qualcomm, the telecommunications giant whose code division multiple access technology built directly on spread spectrum principles, acknowledged her foundational work. Engineers writing about wireless technology history started including her story. Computer science and engineering programs began teaching about Hedy Lamarr alongside other technology pioneers, ensuring future generations would know that revolutionary innovation can come from the most unexpected sources. Yet the compensation question remained unresolved. The patent had expired in 1959, before the technology became commercially viable. Hetty received no royalties from the billions of dollars in commerce her invention enabled. Companies built empires on wireless technology descended from her patent while she lived modestly on her old Hollywood earnings and Social Security. The moral wrong was clear, but legally there was no remedy. The patent system had functioned exactly as designed, protecting inventions for 17 years, then releasing them to public use. No one had anticipated that some inventions would require 40 or 50 years to become technically and commercially feasible. The irony was perfect and painful. Hetty had been told repeatedly that her value lay only in her temporary physical beauty, not her permanent intellectual contribution. And the system proved this judgment correct, at least economically. Her beauty had earned her money during her youth. Her invention earned her nothing but belated recognition in her old age. January 19, 1999, Hedy Lamarr gave what would be one of her final interviews, speaking by phone from her Florida apartment with a reporter who wanted to understand the woman behind the invention. Her voice was elderly, but her mind remained sharp, mixing reminiscences about Hollywood with technical explanations of frequency hopping that demonstrated her continued grasp of the underlying principles. When asked how she felt about finally receiving recognition, she offered a response that captured a lifetime of being underestimated. "I can't understand why it took them so long. I gave it to them when it was most needed." The story of Hedy's unrecognized genius sparked broader conversations about women in science and technology, about how much innovation society had lost by dismissing half the population as intellectually inferior. Researchers began documenting similar cases. Rosalind Franklin's unacknowledged contribution to discovering DNA's structure, Ada Lovelace's pioneering computer programming concepts dismissed by contemporaries, countless women whose scientific work was credited to male colleagues or simply forgotten. Hedy's story became emblematic of systemic failures in recognizing and supporting women's intellectual contributions. Technology companies began using her story in recruitment materials and diversity initiatives, though this created its own complications. Was it genuine commitment to inclusion or just exploiting an inspiring narrative? The question remained open. What was undeniable was that Hedy's invention had become central to the digital revolution. Every smartphone contained multiple radios using spread spectrum technology, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, GPS, cellular data. The global telecommunications industry, worth trillions of dollars, rested partly on foundations she had laid in collaboration with George Antheil during those evening meetings in 1941. In late 1999, Hedy's health began seriously declining. She was 85 years old, had lived through the full span of the 20th century, from the last days of the Austro-Hungarian Empire through 2 world wars to the dawn of the Internet age. She had been worshipped and dismissed, celebrated and forgotten, objectified and underestimated. The technology she invented to help defeat fascism had instead enabled a communication revolution she couldn't have imagined. Billions of people carrying devices in their pockets that used her principles to connect wirelessly across the globe. On January 19, 2000, Hedy Lamarr died in her sleep in Castleberry, Florida, at the age of 85. Her son, Anthony Loder, spread her ashes in the Vienna woods, returning her symbolically to the Vienna of her childhood, the city where her father had taught her to understand how machines worked before Hollywood, before the fame and dismissal, before the long wait for recognition. She had lived just long enough to see her scientific contribution acknowledged, to know that history would remember her as more than a beautiful face. The obituaries revealed the growing awareness of her dual legacy. The New York Times, the Washington Post, major newspapers worldwide led with the invention rather than the film career. Hedy Lamarr, film star and inventor, dies at 85, read the headlines. The articles explain spread-spectrum technology and its connection to modern wireless communications before mentioning Algiers or Samson and Delilah. This represented a fundamental shift in how she was perceived, the inventor who happened to be an actress, rather than the actress who happened to invent something. After her death, the recognition continued accelerating. In 2014, Hedy was inducted posthumously into the National Inventors Hall of Fame, joining Thomas Edison, the Wright brothers, and other titans of American innovation. Her plaque in the Hall of Fame stands as permanent testimony to her contribution, ensuring that visitors learning about American invention encounter her story alongside the others. The German military communications sector, in a historical irony she would have appreciated, began using systems descended from her patent, the very technology she had conceived while imprisoned in her first marriage to an arms dealer who supplied Nazi Germany. The Austrian government, which had barely acknowledged her during her life, erected a memorial. Vienna, the city that had launched her into a world that simultaneously worshipped and dismissed her, finally claimed her as one of its notable citizens, though now emphasizing her scientific contribution rather than her film career or scandalous past. 2025 and the world Hedy Lamarr helped create has become so ubiquitous that most people don't even think about it anymore. When someone pulls out a smartphone to check GPS directions while listening to music through Bluetooth headphones and simultaneously staying connected via Wi-Fi, they're using 3 different applications of spread-spectrum technology, 3 separate implementations of the principle. Hedy and George Antheil patented in 1942. The technology is simply embedded in daily life, invisible infrastructure that enables modern existence. The numbers tell the story of her impact with stunning clarity. According to current industry data from telecommunications research firms, there are over 14 billion active wireless devices in the world, more devices than humans. The global wireless telecommunications industry generates over $3 trillion annually. Wi-Fi alone, one direct application of spread-spectrum principles, is used by over half the world's population. Every GPS-guided navigation system, every Bluetooth speaker, every cellular data connection, every wireless security system, every remote-controlled drone all employ concepts from that patent filed during World War II. Technology historians and engineers have worked to establish clear lines of influence from Hedy's original patent to modern systems. Research published by the IEEE and documented by the Smithsonian Institution's National Museum of American History has traced how military engineers in the 1960s implemented her frequency-hopping concepts, how these military applications migrated to commercial cellular networks in the 80s, and how they became fundamental to Wi-Fi protocols in the 90s. The technical lineage is unambiguous. Modern wireless technology descends directly from the secret communication system. What makes Hedy's contribution particularly remarkable is its cross-domain nature. She took insights from her first husband's weapons manufacturing discussions, combined them with her own engineering knowledge, collaborated with a composer who understood synchronized mechanical systems, and synthesized a solution that pure military engineers hadn't conceived. This interdisciplinary approach, bringing together knowledge from different fields, is now recognized as central to innovation, but it was rare in the hyper-specialized world of 1940s engineering. Her outsider status, which caused her invention to be dismissed, was actually her advantage. The feminist implications of her story continue resonating. Hedy's experience being valued only for appearance while her intellectual contributions were ignored remains painfully relevant. Women in STEM fields still report being underestimated, their ideas dismissed or attributed to male colleagues, their appearance commented on more than their work. Heady stories invoked regularly in discussions about diversity in technology, about the innovation society loses when it fails to recognize talent regardless of who presents it, about the cost of judging people based on one dimension of who they are. Educational institutions have embraced her story. Computer science departments use her as an example when teaching about spread-spectrum technology. Engineering programs include her in discussions of patent history and technology development. Primary and secondary schools teach about her as part of lessons on invention and perseverance. Her image still striking, still undeniably beautiful appears alongside explanations of frequency-hopping spread spectrum, a reminder that genius comes in forms society doesn't expect. In 2015, the documentary Bombshell, the Hedy Lamarr story, brought her full story to broader audiences, combining footage from her film career with technical explanations of her invention and interviews with people who knew her. The film emphasized the tragedy of her unrecognized genius, but also celebrated her ultimate vindication. It won awards at film festivals and introduced new generations to a story that challenged their assumptions about both Hollywood and innovation. Perhaps the most fitting tribute came from the technology industry itself. In November 2015, on what would have been Hedy's 101st birthday, Google featured her in a Google Doodle seen by billions of Internet users worldwide. The animated illustration showed Hedy's face transforming into a diagram of spread spectrum technology, then into images of modern wireless devices, visually capturing her dual legacy. For one day, everyone searching the web encountered her story, a small moment of recognition for a woman who had waited decades to be understood. Today, when engineers discuss the foundations of wireless technology, when telecommunications companies trace the history of their industry, when students learn about the development of Wi-Fi and Bluetooth and GPS, Hedy Lamarr's name appears prominently. The woman Hollywood told to stick to selling kisses is now recognized as a foundational figure in technology that transformed human communication. The invention dismissed by the United States Navy in 1942 enabled the smartphone revolution that began 60 years later. The story ends not with complete justice. Hedy never received the financial compensation her invention deserved, never lived to see the full scope of her impact, but with recognition, finally and permanently. The historical record has been corrected. Her contribution is established, inerasable, acknowledged by the very engineering and technology institutions that once would have dismissed her. The beautiful actress was also a brilliant inventor, and now everyone knows it. The face that launched 1,000 dismissals ultimately launched 1 billion connections, wireless signals carrying human communication across a planet that finally understands what she gave us. Her legacy is every wireless connection, every GPS coordinate, every Bluetooth device, every Wi-Fi network. It's the invisible infrastructure of modern life, the technology so embedded in daily existence that we barely notice it. And now, when we do notice it, when we think about where it came from, we remember the woman who conceived it while Hollywood insisted her only value was her beauty. Hedy Lamarr proved them all wrong, even if she had to wait a lifetime for the world to understand.